Hello, everyone, and welcome to the At the Coalface live that I do every single Friday. And it is Friday, April the 29th today. It is awesome to be here with you as I am nearly every single Friday. And I have an interesting topic that I want to share with you guys today, and that's about e-commerce FOMO, or fear of missing out, and shiny things, and how it sometimes clouds our judgment in this industry. And it clouds the judgment of e-commerce managers, it clouds the judgment of agencies, it clouds the judgment of vendors, it clouds the judgment of VCs. It basically, what I want to talk about today is this topic of fear of missing out. And when we think about or what prompted this discussion, what prompted this thinking today was a brand new article out of the information today that reads the topic, the subject, the title of the article reads, Bolt, a checkout startup worth $11 billion, has been losing customers as revenue stalls. Bolt, which develops software that online stores use to help shoppers pay with one click. So it's another one-click checkout service. Think of it as an alternative to Fast and a few other one-click checkout services that are on the market. It says started the year riding high after rapid-fire fundraising and a private valuation that skyrocketed to $11 billion in January from $6 billion in October. It also easily outlasted Fast, a rival that had raised $120 million from backers, including payments giant Stripe, but imploded earlier this month. Behind the scenes, though, Bolt's revenue growth fell dramatically, and questions have arisen about the veracity of its past statements about merchants that were using its services. Revenue from transactions Bolt processed grew around 10% to $28 million last year after it slashed the fees merchants pay for its services, according to an internal document viewed by The Information. The dramatic slowdown shows Bolt is under significant competitive pressure from PayPal and Shopify, which have launched their own one-click checkout buttons for merchants. And while Bolt has touted efforts to work with more high-profile retailers, the number of merchants it works with has been hovering in the low 300s since 2020 and declined in the beginning of this year, the document showed. And not only are PayPal and Shopify strong competitors to Bolt and the other one-click checkout services, and there are several others, but obviously we had Amazon announce this week, or late last week, they announced Pay with Prime as another one-click checkout service, and we all know how big and how strong Amazon are when it comes to e-commerce. So there are massive headwinds here, and so for a business that the transactions that Bolt processed grew to $28 million last year. So we have a business right now that has been valued at $11 billion on $28 million of annual revenues. Now, if that is not absolute crazy town, I don't know what is. And so we have VCs, especially during the peak of the pandemic, and they were pouring billions, well, tens of millions, and in some cases, billions of dollars into technologies that had e-commerce in their name, or e-commerce in their title, or e-commerce in their pitch deck, or e-commerce in the hushed conversations taking place in the halls of VC, private equity, and venture and startup land, full stop. And so we saw this scenario actually play out with Fast. We saw a scenario where Dom Holland was very, very good at bamboozling. He was very, very good at a pitch. He was very, very good at schmoozing, boozing, and all the rest in the industry. And as a result of that, he was able to hype Fast to the point where investors feared that they were going to miss out if they did not invest. And that's the first part of what I want to talk about today, is the FOMO part. And this primarily relates to the FOMO that VCs feel in the e-commerce space if they do not have access to every single deal that is out there to be had. And as I related last week, it's pretty important that VCs actually understand the technology that they're investing in. It's pretty important that they understand not just the commercials, but also the competitive landscape, the underlying technical architecture of what they're buying into, but also their go-to-market model, their partnership model, and many other things that will define whether a platform like Bolt or like Fast or like Afterpay, which I'll talk about shortly, survives or dies on the vine. Do they actually have a sustainable business model? Do they have a sustainable technical platform? Do they have a sustainable partnership model? with both commercial and technical partners that need to do the implementation as well as the integration of these technologies into their core platforms to drive their growth. And I would say in relation to Bolt and to Fast and to these other standalone one-click checkout services, I have always had, and I've actually called out questions, particularly about Fast, starting about 2 years ago. I started calling out whether there was actually a market for this type of service outside of a broader ecosystem like what PayPal and Shopify and Amazon bring to the table. I questioned it, and I questioned the fact that these one-click checkout services oftentimes do not work seamlessly with SaaS e-commerce platforms because they want to take over the checkout, and these platforms typically do not allow any third-party service to own the checkout outside of the core platform. And even with platforms where checkout can be customized, like BigCommerce, if you customize your checkout for a specific merchant, then a lot of those customizations, whether that be loyalty customization or customer journey customization, there's 1,001 customizations that you may want to bring to the checkout experience. And oftentimes, unless you are running the vanilla version of that checkout, these one-click checkout experiences will not work with those customized other customized checkouts. And as a result of that, there is massive technical barriers to adoption of these technologies at the higher end of the market. Because what happens at the higher end of the market? We've got bigger merchants, we've got more complex merchants, and we've got merchants that tend to want to customize every single element of the customer experience, including the checkout. And as a result of that, they typically are either running custom platforms or heavily customized off-the-shelf platforms with custom checkout experiences. And as a result of that, there is a need to completely customize the integration of a Bolt or a Fast or any of the other one-click checkouts into the checkout experience. It is not just drag and drop, plug and play. And so unless these one-click checkout experiences add tremendous value for the end customer, then they will not spend the money, the time, the effort to integrate these one-click checkout experiences into those customized checkouts. So what is the market that is left for the likes of Bolt and Fast? Well, it's the vanilla merchants. It's the merchants that don't have the money to do custom integrations. It's the merchants that will only accept plug and play technologies as part of their customer experience. And that tends to be the lower end of the market, all the way up to, say, the mid-market, before you get into mid-enterprise. And mid-enterprise and above, oftentimes they start customizing things to a point where Bolt and Fast simply they're no longer plug and play. And so therefore they're difficult to adopt. When we start looking at Afterpay, Afterpay is very similar in the sense that we have, but slightly different in that it's not so much the technical adoption that is difficult, but what is the commercial benefit for the merchant and what is the commercial benefit for the consumer? And is there enough demand from consumers? And is there enough demand from consumers that will pay for the service through basically delayed repayment? So basically, Afterpay makes more money when a customer doesn't repay, similar to a credit card. Basically, when you don't repay your credit card every single month, you have this revolving debt service where the minimum payment is usually just the interest on that. You're not paying down the principal of what you owe, you're paying down the interest. And it's similar with Afterpay and Klarna and Zip and all these other buy now, pay later services. They actually make more money when you don't pay on time, because then they can charge you fees, they can charge you penalties, they can charge you all sorts of other things. And so unfortunately, when the customer pays on time, the only money they make is from the merchants who use their gateway. And their gateway fees, instead of being that 1, 2, 3, 4% of your average payment gateway, it's 7, 8, 9%. And as a result of that, they make money off the merchants through their gateway services. But that pales in comparison to the interest payments that somebody like a Visa or a MasterCard, their cut of the interest on those revolving debt facilities is significantly higher than what the gateways make just providing services and access to pay via credit or debit card. And so the Afterpay model, the Bolt model, the Fast model, all of these models, the buy now, pay later service and the one-click checkout service, they were always going to be challenged. These models, not only technically were they going to be challenged, but also from a customer experience perspective and from a commercial perspective, from an integration perspective, from so many other lenses, these models were always going to be challenged. And now what we're seeing is we're seeing the likes of the Afterpays of the world being turned into a service as opposed to a product, or turned into a feature, not a standalone product. And what we're seeing is, when we see articles like the one that came out in Startup Daily, just when did this article first come out? It came out a couple of weeks ago. It came out 13th of April, so it came out just about two weeks ago now. And the article reads, Afterpay has a growing bad debt problem and its losses are soaring. So we have a conflict in the profitability model of Afterpay here. We have they make more money off customers who don't pay on time, but they lose money for customers that never pay at all, and they have to write those debts off altogether. So it says, the article reads, buy now, pay later market leader Afterpay has posted a staggering $345.5 million loss after tax for the 6 months to end 2021, a 336% increase on the $79.2 million loss the fintech posted in the corresponding period in 2020. The figures are the first published by the BNPL service since Jack Dorsey's US payments platform Square paid Australian $39 billion for the ASX-listed Australian fintech last year, with the M&A finalized in January of this year. The merged company Block now trades a secondary share, CDI, on the ASX. They closed down 0.4% at 163.80 on the news on Tuesday. The good news for the BNPL is that revenue grew by 55% to $645 million in the second half of financial 2021, compared to $417 million in the second half of 2020. But Block had already dampened market expectations of 70% growth for Afterpay by saying earlier that its growth rate sits around 25 to 30%. The other good news is the total loss was offset by an income tax benefit of $156.4 million. However, the company's biggest growth areas are bad debts, up 65%, and expenses, up 70%, amid losses in the UK ClearPay brand as well. Bad debts or receivables impairment expenses more than doubled on a year earlier, rising from $72 million to $176.8 million. And provisioning for bad debts rose from $99 million to $151 million. But Afterpay said the level of debt written off was stable at $125 million, $4 million less than the prior corresponding period. Marketing costs ramped, blah, 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 blah. So what we have here is we have a scenario where the likes of Afterpay and Klarna and Zip, which are not profitable, haven't ever been profitable, and there's no clear path for them to be profitable. And then we have the likes of Bolt and Fast, both their profitability coming into question, their revenue numbers coming into question, their revenue growth coming into question, or in the case of Fast, them actually going out of business because they didn't have enough runway to get to profitability and self-sustainability before their VC funding ran out. And so they went belly up. And now we have questions about Bolt's survivability as a standalone business, or will they be acquired by somebody like Square, like they acquired Afterpay? And so let me address the second half of what I wanted to talk about. So we had FOMO, which primarily relates to VCs and their insatiable desire to invest in anything e-commerce related, particularly during the COVID era over the last 2 years. And then we have shiny object syndrome, right? Shiny object syndrome. And what I mean by shiny object syndrome is the need for merchants to be able to tap into the hottest, latest trend in the industry, right? And whether that be a payment method like an Afterpay, or whether that be a payment method like a one-click payment method like Fast or like Bolt, etc. Brands need to seriously start thinking about the actual value that these technologies are providing for them, both commercially and to their customers in terms of UX. Does it actually make sense to have 36 payment methods in your retail online store, in your B2C, D2C store? Does it make sense to have 36 payment methods? Or does that actually increase the complexity of the dichotomy of choice, whereby consumers, they just go with the one that's most recognizable and the most obvious to them, which is their credit card, because all these other payment methods really just confuse the decision and introduce friction right at the point where somebody wants to actually check out and pay for something they've decided to buy. And so from my perspective, we've got FOMO happening right across the whole industry from an investment perspective. And that's why we're getting these outlandish valuations for these technologies that are related to e-commerce. But we're also having this be fueled by the uptake of these, frankly, ridiculous in some instances, technologies by retailers and by merchants. And so I guess what I'm trying to recommend here is a return to some sort of business case, a return to some sort of logic, a return to some sort of testing, and ultimately getting to know your customers better and understanding whether what you're trying to do for them and the additional services you're trying to bring to the table for them are actually in demand. Find out from your customers whether this is something they actually want, whether it's something they actually need before you introduce it just for the sake of introducing it to keep up with the Joneses. And this is what we're happening. We have fear of missing out. We have snapping at shiny things by the entire retail industry, and it's the retail version of keeping up with the Joneses. So keeping up with the Joneses typically means if my neighbor buys a new car, if my neighbor buys a new Mercedes, then I need to buy a new Mercedes, or I need to buy a flasher Mercedes to look like I'm as good as them or better than them. We have the exact same thing happen in the retail industry. We have brands following in lockstep what other brands are doing instead of creating a differentiated experience, instead of creating a streamlined experience, instead of reducing friction. In some respects, they're actually increasing friction by through the dichotomy of choice and adding too many choices, too many options, too many decisions between that stand ultimately between the customer shopping with you and buying from you. Shopping doesn't do you any good. Customer shopping with you doesn't mean anything. It means they're browsing. The only time a customer is valuable to you is when they become a customer, meaning they're spending money with you, meaning they're buying from you. And so anything that increases the steps or the friction between them shopping with you and them buying with you is a net negative for you as a brand. And so what I'm urging the industry to do, full stop, is to put its thinking cap back on now that we've come out of the heady days of the absolute insanity of COVID fueled e-commerce, and now we're returning much more back to the mean, the pre-2019 mean of e-commerce uptake and e-commerce penetration. And as a result of that, everybody's going to have to start getting a lot more smart about what they do, because during COVID, almost anything you did worked. If it was anything related to e-commerce and you were trying it and you weren't successful, then you probably didn't have a very good business model to begin with, because if you can't be successful during COVID, you probably never will be able to be successful in e-commerce otherwise. So I want to encourage the industry to come back to a place where they're starting to create genuine business cases around everything that they do, that they start putting their thinking caps back on, that they start looking at things through the lens of the customer, and that they don't let FOMO and they don't let shiny things get the best of them and create more friction between them and the customer as opposed to less. So anyways, that's my admonition to you. I hope you guys have a fabulous weekend. I wish Bolt every success. I hope that they manage to survive and unlike Fast, that they can manage to grow the market for their products and services. And frankly, I hope Afterpay survives too, because they did upset the apple cart of the industry, and I always like disruptors. So hopefully they can find a way to be profitable and to make money instead of just, I guess, hemorrhaging cash, which obviously can't go on forever. Anyways, have a fantastic weekend. Fantastic to catch up with you guys again, and we'll see you next Friday on At the Coalface Live. Cheers, guys.